professor and get a C in the class, there's nothing else you can do.
I mean, you're not wrong. That is a class that knocks people out.
And like it's just all based on, obviously you have to try, but it's all based on your professor.
I heard he was like insanely tough for lab though.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like if your results were off, he would like make you do everything all over again.
That's what I didn't understand going through like years of different labs. That's just like actually care the numbers you got. Like professors were just like, you did the thing. Which really doesn't make any sense. I don't know this.
I had a Dr. Lustig who was an anatomy professor who did not care about chemistry.
Okay.
That's great.
Oh. Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah, I know.
He only had to go for a doctor coach. Doctor coach. Because he used to be a
What's his last name?
Lustig.
Yep. I know. I had him. Did not care about chemistry. Just talked all the time. He was fun.
He was great. That class was great. We were just like trying to shoot things out of the compressed air hoses. Like,
Yep. Yeah, he's a fun guy.
he didn't do the final lab.
Yeah, I think I remember him like giving us the answers to all
Yeah, great. It was probably one of those enjoyable classes.
I think I got sunburned today.
I can believe it. It's the
I'm
right.
not upset about it.
No, thank God, good weather. It's time. I mean, I think this is the next thing we really need to move forward past the pandemic. Open up outside again, do more things outside. Yeah, it's gonna be good.
I ran into a philosophy class. You wanted to start the class with that.
What's that?
I ran into a philosophy. You had to ask me the second time. Major philosophy. I ran into a philosophical question. Well, it may not be philosophical, but have you ever just stepped back and looked at telephone poles?
No.
It looks like you're just walking down the streets or around campus. We have such a beautifully crafted designs everywhere and just great achievements of human architecture. And then there's just pieces of wood holding wire going around everything, supplying electricity to it. And it just looks like we just moved into this planet and we're like, we need cabling going everywhere, so let's just put it up as fast as possible. It just looks gross.
Have you seen the pictures of the old electrical wires where everything is individually wired? You see this massive tower, big centers of cities. Like, yeah, it was just nightmarish.
That sounds scary.
Yeah, it's freaky looking.
But I'd also say that the electric company in the Dominican Republic was two guys in a pickup truck with a ladder. And they put the ladder on the floor, on the ground, and be standing on the very top rung and just like walking up there with this bundle and throw it up there, and it was just grass nest.
Well, this is why the better neighborhoods, I mean, they do try to run as much of the electricity underground as they can. Now, I think there's a limit to how much they can do that way, but, clearly that's preferable whenever you can, otherwise it's a aesthetic eyesore.
Yes.
But, beats not having electricity.
And we don't notice it anymore because we just grew up with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing the things that we don't notice. All right, well, today we are on book 7 of Augustine's Confessions. Right, yeah, this is where this is an important turning point. We will do the accompanying readings on Friday, and then we've got a student-led discussion on Monday. Who's doing book 7? Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah.
So we'll do that. We are approaching the midterm point. I'm supposed to put in midterm grades. For people that have more than like 1 or 2 readings done, I'll put in the average of the reading summaries. For people who don't have any reading summaries done or only like 1, I'll probably just stick in a C. Just because even if you have an A on like just 1 or 2 reading summaries, that's such a small sample of the work from the course that you could still get a not great grade. I want to just highlight that possibility. Questions about anything logistical? We all know where we are, what we're doing. Yes.
the next step? That's due Friday or Monday?
I think I may do Friday after the 4-day spring break.
Okay.
Is that right?
I think I read it as the Friday of spring break, and I was like, that can't be right.
If I did that, that is incorrect.
Okay.
I would not make, I'm not that guy.
I-
You know, I mean, look, not every student likes me, and I know I'm strict about some things, but I'm not the jerk that's gonna make something intentionally due in the middle of your 4-day spring break. I'm not that jerk. I might be a different jerk, but I'm not that jerk.
And it's the rough draft.
Yes, we're talking about the rough draft. And I'll provide a rubric. I'll get around to it.
We'll get around to writing bigger too, so.
Well, you know what your things do. You see, my thing, yeah, little more willy-nilly.
I'm thinking your rubric is due on the 15th, and we also have a vote on that.
And that's not unreasonable. I mean, it's already made, so it's just a matter of me taking 90 seconds to find it and vote it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, well, good. I mean, look, again, the point of the papers is this. I want a paper, an argumentative paper, with a thesis related to Augustine or Augustinianism, which covers a lot of things since he wrote 100 books. He's said something about all sorts of things. I want you to sustain an argument for, against, nuanced, whichever. Want you to sustain the argument, maybe consider an objection or two to your view, and conclude. I mean, it's not rocket science, it's what I consider to be the standard philosophy paper. Although occasionally, not usually in 451, but occasionally we have people who are new to philosophy and think they can write a book, a paper about a topic. We don't want, I don't want your musings on a topic. I want an argument. That's the kind of jerk I am. I'm the jerk that actually wants an argument in the paper. I don't want, oh, isn't this interesting? Okay, well, maybe that's nice for some class. That's not this class. So say Augustine is right about something, say Augustine is wrong about something, say he's half right about something, but you have to take a position. And I want you to carefully define your key terms. And the nice thing about an Augustine class is generally the place to go for your key terms is somewhere in Augustine. Or if you can't find it in Augustine, then use something like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or something like that. Don't just make up your own willy-nilly definitions of things like, words mean things in philosophy. So and some words mean multiple equivocal things. So if you're going to use something like free will, you need to define free will. And don't just come up with your own definition. Know which version of free will you're talking about. If you don't know that there are multiple versions of free will, bring it up in class, and I bet I'll talk about it for 10 minutes. I mean, this style of class is where, frankly, you can get me to write your paper for you if you're clever. You just have to ask the right questions. So how would you define free will? Well, there's 3 definitions to free will. Surely. And Augustine means this one. Protagonist. All right, on that topic, Book 7 of Augustine's Confessions. Thoughts, reactions, questions? What did you see? What did you think? What did you like? What didn't you like?
Kind of going off of what you just said. Does Augustine actually give a clear definition for good and evil other than just the essence of God?
He probably doesn't define it in this sense. He probably doesn't say my definition of good and evil is. But if you do some implicit, sleuthing, you can figure out that basically what he means by good is something like being or the form of goodness. And what he means by evil is a complete absence of goodness, a privation of goodness. And where he gets those ideas is frankly from Platonism, especially Plotinus. But the roots of that go all the way back to Plato. So so it's in there. Implicitly it's in there. Other thoughts?
So I was reading the first half of this on the Great Lawn yesterday, and I was actually reading it aloud because my friend here was sitting with me. He was kind of interested, he just felt like being lazy and listened to me read. But we both started laughing at the opening line of chapter 6. By this time, also I had rejected the deceitful divinations and impious ravings of the astrologers.
That is a good line. And Augustine has a lot of great lines like that. One of my favorite lines really, my favorite description of philosophers anywhere is in chapter 9 of this book, where he says, by means of a certain man, puffed up with most unnatural pride, you procured for me certain books of the Platonists, translated out of the Greek into Latin. So I love that image of the philosopher, of this puffed up with most unnatural pride person. And frankly, I've known enough philosophers. Sounds about right. Not about Platonists in particular. But, maybe the ancient Platonists were worse. Other questions, reactions?
Just talking about God's goodness, it made me think of kind of it's when we think about the purpose for people, because that's like one of the arguments that I've heard is, some people say, oh, you got great man as companions or stuff like that. And one of the arguments is that just out of God's own goodness is that he made people because he wanted to it includes like understand that goodness sort of thing, like there was an alternative motive. And I thought that was interesting. Just kind of think of that argument, like how that sort of tradition set aside from other beliefs where Jews may be servants or stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think there's an interesting connection between that topic and the traditional question of what is love really based on. And Plato's Symposium has a lot of conversation on this. And one of the models of love is a little morally problematic when you think about it. One of the models of love is it's based in need and neediness. And if you think about it, there's certainly a degree to which that can be really unhelpful, especially when you apply that to kids. If you have kids because you, as the adult, are needy, you're going to have a deeply unhealthy relationship with that kid. These are the kinds of parents that are trying to get something out of their kids, some sort of security, some sort of, experience that they themselves didn't achieve. These are the parents that need their kid to be the captain of the football team or the head of the cheerleaders or, some wish fulfillment that they themselves failed to achieve. And you can see how that would be really unhelpful. Now, if you apply that kind of question to God, why does God make creatures? If it's out of need, that's kind of problematic. So the model you want is you want it to be out of sort of overflow of love. I mean, maybe in this, maybe you want an object for your love. Maybe that's a good motivation for either reproduction or for creation. But yeah, you can get to some very interesting and sometimes troubling implications. In the Plato's Symposium, it talks about need love based on sort of gift love. And divine love it can't be based on need, on the Platonic view. And I think Augustine on that would agree.
I kind of have a question about kind of Augustine. He's kind of, at this point, he's converted, or he's at least found more, he's stronger in his faith. And my question is, because he initially rejected it because of the reasoning, his concept, especially the problem of evil. But even before I'm kind of confused why he's now considered himself a follower of Christianity when he still hasn't quite solved the problem of evil until later in the chapter.
So yeah. I mean, some of these things are kind of a process or kind of equivocal. And in the most important sense, he's still not a Christian by the end of the chapter. he might be on something like the path to Christianity or a pre-Christian or something like that. But it's pretty clear that he has not yet made the actual choice. Rather, he's become intellectually sold on the idea of Christianity, or at the very least, had his intellectual roadblocks to accepting it removed. So this chapter is mainly the process of him removing the roadblocks, especially two of the roadblocks that go back to the Manichaean objections. The corporality of God objection, A, and the problem of evil, B. And, and he's kind of thinking through different nuances to the problem. But yeah, I think he's at one of those weird in process in between stages in this chapter. He's the guy who's interested, who's coming to church, that's still shacking up with his girlfriend, who is still not quite sure that that's what he wants to do, that he wants to make this decision. So, but he's interested and he's excited about it. So he's at this, incongruous position where any pigeonholed categorization of him is not going to work very well.
It's interesting. I guess in chapter 19, he starts talking about Jesus Christ and how even though he was starting to come to have more knowledge of God through Platonism, he still thought of Christ as only a man of surpassing wisdom. And so I guess we're seeing this tension between reason and faith again here, and I'm interested, what extent does he see reason, or what purpose does he see? Because I know, actually, I don't have a ton of experience, but I wrote a paper on Aquinas in one of my classes, and he saw reason as it can get you pretty far. Mm-hmm. He always talks about Aristotle a lot and how maybe he even got to the gates of heaven, but without Christ. So is Augustine pretty similar? It seems like that, but I'm not sure.
Sure. Here, let me draw an image here. So the medieval model for knowledge works something like this. And this is true of Augustine, it's true of Aquinas, it's true of Maimonides, it's true of the Islamic philosophers, it's true of Boethius. I mean, in a certain sense, it's true of, well, it's not true of everything here, but the question is something like this. What can you learn from reason? What can you only learn from revelation? And what is the overlap between the two? So for Aquinas, Aquinas and Augustine are going to believe that you fill in revelation with Christianity, defined by the revelations of the Bible and, to a lesser degree, church tradition, church interpretation stuff. And then Aquinas is, of course, going to fill in reason with Aristotle. And Aquinas is going to say among the things that you can learn from Aristotle are things like the existence of God. He has a purely reason-based view of how one can come to the conclusion that God exists, based on Aristotle's argument for the unmoved mover. But what Aquinas puts over here are things like the incarnation and the Trinity, which I think are relevant to our conversation since we're talking about chapter 19 on the incarnation of Christ and what that's like and how that works. So neither Augustine or Aquinas think that you can reason your way to, God must incarnate himself, God must be a Trinity, something like that. That's something you only learn through revelation. So really the question becomes, what is the significance of the sorts of things that you find in this overlap area? How good are they? How important are they? Can they get you to heaven? Usually there are ethical rules that go in here too. Important ethical principles, natural law and such. Now for Augustine rather than Aquinas, the main difference, of course, is going to be that he's going to stick Platonism in over here. And he doesn't, I don't remember him having a formal argument for the existence of God, but the Platonists and the Platinians basically have a sort of creator deity, something called the demiurge, as part of their general worldview. So Augustine is still going to think there's got to be somehow Plato and Plotinus got to God, because or something very close to God, because Plato and Plotinus have it. But Augustine has a much stronger sense of epistemic sinfulness. The idea that people's sinfulness isn't just a moral flaw, but it's also a flaw and a barrier to knowledge, which is why he's very quick to say things like, I initially rejected the New Testament because of my pride. So again, it's not a reason problem. It's a sinfulness problem. So and that's what he says about the Platonists. He says, hey, these guys were brilliant. They were arrogant as hell and sinful, but they were brilliant. So the two sort of distinctives of Augustine are, Plato, Plotinus going over here as the source of reason, and sort of a bigger view of the power of sinfulness to undermine our ability to reason and to embrace the truth. And we will see this illustrated again in Book 8, where he's going to basically say, hey, I knew that Christianity was true and I wanted to embrace it, but not yet. Where he said, God, give me chastity and continence, but not yet. Which is what you do when you are, when you're having your choices shaped by sort of the broad power of original sin, according to Augustine. Does that help? So it's often thought that Aquinas thinks, it's definitely true that Aquinas has a lesser concern about this. And he has a more articulated concern of what sorts of things can be reasoned to. Things like systematic natural law for ethics, things like the 5 arguments for the existence of God. That being said, at the end of the day, I think Augustine and Aquinas both agree. Yeah, Aquinas might say, yeah, you can do some cool things with reason, but you're still going to hell. So, so I think, I tend to think that the differences between them are overblown. I think they have a lot more in common than they have apart from each other.
One thing I've always kind of struggled to conceptualize is what is the right way to think about the Holy Trinity and what each part represents?
That is a hard one, isn't it? So here, let me.
Why don't you go around the room and all be heretics to try and describe?
No. Tell you what, John. I want to answer that question, but not today. So give me an account of the Trinity, but not yet. Because there's a lot of cool things in Book 7 that I want to get to. But throw that question out on another day when conversation's a little slow, and I'll bite on it. We'll talk about the Athanasian shield. We'll talk about water, and we'll talk about modalism and the different metaphors and the different metaphors that are heretical. But I've often joked that I stopped asking students to find the Trinity because they always commit heresy. And frankly, historically, that was also the case. Historically, the smart thing to do was to keep your mouth shut about the Trinity. Because generally, once you define anything, you were just declared a heretic. And you usually were. All right, let's look at some of the details here.
I have a question about the second sentence.
Sure.
But the more advanced I was in age, so much the more I was defiled by vain things.
Yeah.
So is he feeling more captivated by vain things, or he was more offended with himself that he likes the vain things?
That is a great question. And the funny thing here is he's talking, everything in this chapter seems to be about philosophy about the nature of God. But given the larger context, my mind would first go to he's experiencing a stronger sexual addiction, is what I normally would think about that sentence. And especially if he says, my evil and abominable youth is now dead, I was passing into early manhood. But the more advanced I was in age, so much more was I defiled by many things. So maybe it's still talking about the sex stuff.
It sounds like he's just saying he was going into manhood, but the sexual urges were even more pronounced.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose his point might be something like, yeah, just because I've been having sex for 10 years doesn't mean I've worked my way through the addiction. It's gotten worse. Maybe. But that might be the wrong reading of this. I mean, because the immediate thing he follows with this is, I could conceive of no substantial being, except much as those I was wont to see with my own eyes. So if he's talking about being defiled by vain things, he might be saying that he's committing a kind of intellectual adultery, or rather, not adultery, intellectual idolatry, because he can't conceive of God properly. So even though he's, almost 30 and been wrestling with philosophy for years, he's still got this idea in his head that when we talk about God or a God, we have to be talking about a physical guy running around with nails and hair. And that we can't be talking about sort of a spiritual, immaterial entity. And that's going to be something that the Platonists are going to ultimately help him conceptualize. It's hard for me to be sympathetic to this thing. I guess the problem is that he was a Manichae for so long, and these Manichae concerns got deep down into him. That is what I have to assume. Because honestly, the only people I run into today that say things that reveal that they can't even conceive of the concept of God, in a vaguely, ballpark correctly way. Sometimes you meet like a scientist naturalist who says stupid things like, yeah, well, we sent the Voyager satellite up past Saturn, so we've disproved the existence of God because there's no guy sitting up there on the throne. Again, most of us know, atheists or not atheists, most of us in our culture know when people talk about the idea of God, you're not talking about a God up physically in the sky somewhere on a physical chair. But maybe that was less clear in the ancient world, especially an ancient world dominated still by Homeric type imagery, where physical gods and goddesses literally lived up on Mount Olympus. So maybe there is maybe that's just sort of a cultural challenge. Maybe that's just something that's in their culture that they tend to, a misconception that they tend to go towards. So if we look at chapter 1, we can see at the end of the first paragraph, basically based on Platonism, he comes to the conclusion that I believe with all my soul that you, God, are incorruptible, inviolable, immutable. These are all traditional Platonist claims about ultimate being, about the form of the good, about, I believe that's Nous, the God beyond God. Not knowing whence or how, I clearly saw and was certain that what can be corrupted is inferior to what cannot be corrupted, and what cannot be violated, I am unhesitatingly placed above that which is violable. And what suffers no change, I saw to be better than what can be changed. So again, if we put the Platonic divided line back up on the board, all three of those things, you would say things like, physical things are corruptible, non-physical things are incorruptible. Physical things are changeable, immaterial things are unchangeable. Physical things are violable, immaterial things are inviolable. By the way, in case the language is throwing you off, viable means that one is able to do things to them, able to affect them, harm them, and so forth. Whereas, so this physical chair, if I really wanted to, I could go get an axe and chop it up. If I decided I don't like the Pythagorean theorem, I can't just chop up the Pythagorean theorem. So that's kind of the logic behind this. But he's using Platonic logic, very, very clear. And he's going to say that whatever ultimately counts as God, it's got to be these three. It's got to have these three traits, which is why he comes back to it still can't be a physical guy running around, either on Mount Olympus or on a throne by Saturn or something like that. So we see in the second paragraph, he says, hence, although I did not think of you as being in the shape of a human body, I was still forced to think you as something corporeal, existent in space and place, either infused into the world or even diffused outside the world throughout infinite space. Oh, so now he's considering things like pantheism, God is everywhere and everything, or in the space around the earth. But he's gotten past the anthropomorphizing of God, of thinking God has to be in a physical human body like Zeus. So he's making progress there. But he's still thinking that God has to be in space and time. So he's still working his way through that. So in the final paragraph of chapter 1, he still goes on to say, so gross of heart was I, that I had no clarity even of my own self, that whatever was not extended over or diffused throughout or compacted into or projected up to definite measures of space, or did not or could not receive something of this kind, I thought to be completely non-existent. So again, he has two categories, the material and the non-existent. And we already know where he's going to go. He's going to say, we have this special secret third category, the immaterial that is not extended into space and place. And ultimately, that will be how he gets around the first of the Manichaean concerns. Now, the second of the Manichaean concerns, Old Testament ethics, I don't think he mentions in this chapter at all. That seems to be, even more so than the physicality. He seems to just think, that was kind of a red herring. But really, what turns out to be his main focus is the problem of evil. And he kind of gives two different answers to do two different aspects of the problem of evil. Again, the problem of evil, if God is all good, if God is all powerful, why does evil exist? Because if God is all good, he's not going to create evil. If God is all powerful, he is able to prevent evil from coming into existence. So why does it exist? His answer to the question of why does evil exist is to say it doesn't. Evil is not created. All created things are good on the Platonic view of the world. All of being is good. All of creation is good. Some of it is less good than others. So with the divided line, this line can be being itself, and the things above the division are better, and the things below are worse, to the point of near, nothingness. But evil simply equals non-existence. So that solves the problem of who created evil, why does it exist? Because his answer is it doesn't. Nobody did.
This just popped in my head. What would things that are immaterial and considered bad, things like arrogance, or something like the concept of arrogance, or
Sure.
things like that are not evil in general, but like a specific.
Well, Augustine is going to say it's a lack of something. So arrogance is a lack of humility. So he's got to make moves like that. Now, whether or not that is a satisfactory or appropriate way to define vices, that's up for debate. But a good medieval thinker, Augustinian or Thomist, will define virtues as being sort of higher levels of existence, higher levels of being, and vices, things like arrogance, cowardice, as lacks of being, lacks of actualization. So this is easier to see with intellectual virtues. Someone who is knowledgeable has actualized and gained a lot of mental, intellectual virtue. Somebody who is sort of intellectually, not intellectually foolish, they lack kind of high development, higher skills, intellectually speaking. And a good Augustinian or Thomist would apply that same kind of logic to moral traits. Someone who's courageous has lots of courage created properly. Somebody who is cowardly lacks courage. So that is, is one way of conceptualizing these things. It's, if you buy into the system, it starts to make a lot of sense. But if you just kind of make up your own definitions, that's probably not the way one would initially, make account of these things. But that's an excellent question. One of the amazing things about the medieval Christian views is if you get your head into them, you can see the whole world differently. These categories of actuality and potential, of being and non-being, existence and non-existence. It's a very non-contemporary way of thinking about things, but you can see the whole world that way. The last great influential writer that was really good at this was C.S. Lewis. He bought into this hook, line, and sinker. Very, very self-aware. Which is why, in the final book of the Narnia trilogy, they get to the Narnia beyond Narnia. Yeah, honestly, I read 6 to my kids, and I wasn't willing to read the 7th to my kids because I didn't want to read about the apocalypse with them. A lot of that stuff is weird and depressing. And then by the time I thought they would be old enough to have an adult discussion about it, they were no longer interested. So, oops. Maybe with the third one, I'll read it anyway.
My first introduction to Christianity was, quote, "Don't read Revelations."
Did this cause you to immediately go read Revelations?
No.
Okay, good.
I did not read.
Actually, that's not the advice I'd give somebody. I'd say don't read Leviticus. Because if you read Revelations, it'll probably make you really curious. But Leviticus will put you to sleep. All right. So we're talking about the problem of evil. So one nuance is, why does evil exist? Augustine's answer is no, it doesn't. The other nuance is sort of like, why do bad things happen to us? And Augustine says, duh, free will. Most immediately, this is something that you might see on a bumper sticker. Everything happens for a reason. Sometimes the reason is we are foolish and make bad decisions. So why do bad things happen? Because humans are foolish and make bad decisions. And this works for a lot of evil things, at least collectively speaking. But the one area of life that it really struggles with is what is called natural evil. Why are childhood cancers a thing? Child did nothing wrong. Why are there earthquakes that kill seemingly innocent people? This is sort of the hardest area of the problem of evil. And I don't know if Augustine addresses that directly. Now, a broadly Augustinian way of talking about it would be to say something like this, that those are somehow remote effects of evil free choices. So if you want to have sort of a very wooden reading of Genesis, you say, well, humans, Adam and Eve, made catastrophic bad decisions at the sort of founding points of the human race, and there are still sort of remote implications of that. Death enters the world, and that this is why there are childhood leukemias. If you look at some of the language there, it says the earth itself is cursed because of this initial sin. So maybe that's why earthquakes happen. That's one way. The other Augustinian way you can go, and frankly, I think this one's even weirder. You can just say all things that look like natural evil are just demons having a good time. So if some child gets leukemia, it's because, like the church lady might say, Satan. It's because some demon is tormenting that poor child and making evil choices with their free will.
The professor kind of gave me that answer when I asked this person recently. I was a little caught off guard.
Yeah, there are people that still give that answer. I think if you want to be an Augustinian free will guy, which I don't think is required by Orthodox Christianity, but if you want to stick to Augustine, I think the initial sin shattered the structure of the world kind of answer. I think that's the more attractive answer, I would think. But there's other answers for why evil exists, and you don't have to limit yourself to free will. You can say something like evil exists because we need the opportunity for a kind of superior moral growth, something like that. That's a much more contemporary way of addressing the issue. And you don't have to say anything that sounds like fundamentalist. Irenaeus, he lived early. That was what, 2nd, 3rd century? And then, so you're familiar with this line of thought.
Something?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're basically stealing everything I want to talk about on Monday, so just.
All right. Well, let's pull the plug on that. I don't want to undermine, because that's a good conversation. All right. Let's see. 10 minutes left. So I'm going to skip over the rather funny conversation about astrology and horoscopes. Did we talk about this before? Yeah, I think we've mentioned this. He disproves it with twins and with a master and servant both having kids on the same day, and strangely they have different fates.
This line of saying even because the one guy was so obsessed, he would even care about it when his dog had puppies. Even he would the horoscopes for them.
Well, again, if you really think this, I think there's a lot of desire. Historically, there's a lot of desire for explanation and knowledge. That's the original sort of Gnostic impulse. Everyone wants to know what's really going on, whether it's the QAnon explanation for things, the conspiracy theory, or whether it's wokeism. Once you've got, once you understand these oppressive categories, you can apply it to anything, Dr. Seuss, or math. Math is white supremacy. You can see these, you can just find it everywhere. And it's this one size, I found, all I have is a hammer, everything must be a nail, and I'm going to try to use this on everything. And you see these attitudes. So I think this Gnostic impulse, this desire to know things. So if you think astrology is really the way, if I thought that was really what revealed things, I would be really into it. Here's a little bit of honesty with you. I think at heart, I'm a little bit of a Pythagorean, which means that I think reality is more mathematical than most people realize. So I get really excited about teaching inductive reasoning to my logic class. In fact, I've got one of my favorite trophies right here in my hands. I was showing it off to my logic class. This is an invitation to the Delta Upsilon Texas Hold'em tournament several years ago, where I beat over 60 undergrads and faculty at Texas Hold'em, including a dozen that bought back in a second time so I could beat them again. So I took first place and I took home the iPad mini. And then I felt a little guilty because a professor who does statistical reasoning, it's not really a fair fight.
I just want to add quickly that I have gotten the royal flush
And what form of kind? Very, very cool. Very cool. But all that to say, I tell people in that logic class, there is a mathematical formula for maximizing your best chance at marrying the absolute best person for you. There's mathematical formulas that you can apply to literally everything. And not surprisingly, I'm very good at things. But my wife says I waste too much time on it, which is probably true. But all that to say, people get really into the things that they think are foundationally important and revealed. Chapter 9, if I only have 6 or 7 minutes left, I want to talk about chapter 9, where he talks about the Platonists. And what's interesting is, so we see a few things here. He gets the books of the Platonists. He still can't read Greek, so he mentions that they're translated from Greek into Latin. And he says, in the Platonists I read, not indeed with these words, but with much the same thought, enforced by many various arguments, and he starts quoting scripture and saying, in the Platonists, he found the truth of many claims of scripture. So that my favorite is right here in from the Gospel of John chapter 1. He says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him nothing was made. What was made in him is life, and the light was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not comprehended. So he's saying, he's finding these deep Christian truths, not in Scripture, but in Plato. This deeply philosophical passage of John has been compared to, again, St. Plotinus, which is why the existence of God for Augustine is not an article of faith, but it's something one can reason to through Platonic type reasoning. In Plato's Timaeus, Plato gives a kind of creation story. I read that the soul of man, although it gives testimony of the light, is not itself the light, but the Word, God himself, is, quote, the true light which enlightens every man that comes into this world, and that he was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. So again, he's saying that Platonism says the importance of the soul, the human soul, but that the soul is not the ultimate, that there's something more important than the soul. And then he distinguishes Platonism from Christianity. It says, but that he came into his own did not receive him, but as many received him, to them he gave power to become the sons of God, to them that believe in his name. This I did not read in those books. So I take that to mean he did not find reference to the incarnation in the Platonic books. Again, I read that the Word of God was born not of the flesh, nor of blood, nor of the will of man, nor the will of the flesh, but of God. So again, that God must be immaterial, he finds in Platonism. But I did not read there that the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. So he finds the spiritual claims about God, the material claims about God there, but he does not find the incarnation claims about the second person of the Trinity, Christ. I found out in these books, though it is said differently and in many ways, that the Son, being in the form of the Father, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, for by nature he is the same as him. But those books do not have that he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made the likeness of man, and having found his name. So again, in Platonian Platonism, there is actually a distinction between the original source of God, sort of the God beyond God, and the proximate intelligence of God, nous. So again, there's even not two gods, but sort of two distinct persona there. So again, this sounds a lot like Christianity, and Augustine is sort of impressed as hell. So then, skipping down a bit, but that according to the time he died for the ungodly, that he spared not your only son, but delivered him up for us, is not there. So again, there are a lot of things about the incarnation and the crucifixion that he's saying he's not finding in the Platonists. Although they know God, they do not glorify him or give thanks, but become vain in their thoughts, and their foolish heart was darkened. For professing themselves to be wise, and became fools. So again, he's saying the Platonists are smart, but they're fools. Therefore, I also read that they changed the glory of your incorruption into idols and various images. And it's the likeness of the image of a corruptible man with birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Now here, I'm not really sure. This doesn't sound like a Platonist. They're not idolaters. So I'm not sure if he's still talking about Platonists or if he's talking about the human condition more generally. So I think that's a fascinating set of claims that he claims that he finds a ton of important, Christian claims, in Platonistic reasoning. Then we get to chapter 12, where we get back to the problem of evil. The idea is, and here we get a lot of the reasoning that evil is not a substance, that every substance is good, every substance is created. Evil is uncreated and not a substance, and not good, but it is a lack of thing, a lack of being. Therefore, God has not created it. God is not on the hook for its state. So yeah, there you go. I mean, there's many more claims that we could focus in here. I'll jump to the next to last paragraph of the entire book, in chapter 21. All this, those writings the Platonists do not have. Their pages do not have this face of piety, the tears of confession, your sacrifice, a troubled spirit, a contrite and a humble heart, the salvation of your people, the city that is like a bride, the pledge of the Spirit, the cup of our redemption. In those books no one sings, shall not my soul be subject to God, for he is my God and my Savior, my protector. I shall be moved no more. So his complaint is, though, while the broad Christian metaphysics is sort of mirrors what can be reasoned to by Platonism, the pious practices, the redemption, the devoted response, which is not just an intellectual response, but a whole personal response, he finds is not there. And therefore he judges that the Platonist grasp of truth tends to corrupt them in a sense, in that it tends to make them more arrogant. And if you've ever met a really smart philosopher, or even a scientist or a professor of any kind, there's a correlation. I've sometimes mentored younger professors, and I've had a few say to me, I'm scared that it's making me arrogant. And I sometimes say, yeah, it might be. I say, in one sense, don't worry about it, because among professors, your level of arrogance won't even be noticed. On the other hand, for the sake of your personal life, of being a good human being, any sort of devotional life, on that sense, I might worry about it. But it's not going to cause you professional problems.
Actually, a very honest friend.
I try to be.
Sorry I cut you off earlier.
No, you're good. Hang on.
I was on.
I thought you were playing out music.
All right, thank you. Well, that was fun.
Hey, you guys-
Sadly, that's my idea of a good time.
What?